Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hey everyone, BMB Flyer here. I'm going to show you how to use GW's contrast paint to get a nice easy red. I put a Stonewall gray base coat over a white primer on this. You can start with a gray primer, doesn't matter. The gray will help mute down some of that red and not make it as bright. I've got Blood Angel Red as the contrast paint that I'll be using. Make sure you shake that up or agitate it really well before you start painting with it. Have a paper towel handy for cleaning up the excess on the brush. I've got a medium-sized base coating brush that I'm going to use. I've shaken up my contrast paint, and now I'm just going to start at the top and work my way down. If you've seen any of my other contrast paint videos, you'll be familiar with how I do this. You want to make sure to cover any of the recesses and tight little crevices and cracks. The paint doesn't flow as well as, say, a normal wash would, so you do need to be a little bit more particular about finding all those little recessed areas and spots that might get easily missed. So work deliberately, take a look, check your work as you go. Gravity will help pull the paint downward, so that's why I like to start at the top and let it kind of flow downward, because you will have to do some cleanup either on the lower edges of, say, the arms or the legs and some other areas where it'll commonly pool in little joints and cracks. So just be aware that it'll pool up and that you need to dab it away, and you'll do just fine. After you've covered the entire miniature, go back again and double check and see if there's any areas that either have some super heavy buildup or possibly some areas that you might have missed. I usually have 2 or 3 areas that I need to get a little bit of paint worked into, as well as a couple of spots where it's just a little bit heavier than the rest. Really be cognizant of those panels that are big and flat. You do want some variation because the contrast paint will show some of those edges. That's what it's going to do. But if it's a real heavy layer, you're going to want to try to dab some of that away. The sooner you work, the better. However, if it starts to dry, you can actually re-wet your brush with some of that contrast paint, work on the panel a little bit, and then dab it away, and it'll actually reactivate the paint. You don't have a whole lot of time to be able to do that effectively, but just be aware that it's something you can do. You'll get comfortable with it the more you practice. Once you've let that contrast paint dry for at least an hour, grab a rust red or a reddish brown color. I'm going to use this Reaper Rust Brown. I really like this color. And a nice synthetic dry brush with a wide area. Get your brush loaded with some paint and then use a paper towel to get most of the paint off. I do want to talk real quick about dry brush technique in this case. You don't need a lot of brush pressure. You're really just kind of dusting the miniature in this case, and it's going to be different from person to person, but I'm not using extra hard pressure to apply the paint. I really just want to catch those high edges, and I'm going to use a downward only motion. I'm not going to try to brush back and forth or up and down as I go across the miniature. And what that does for me is help grab all those top edges and very few or relatively few of the lower edges. It's okay if you get some paint on there, but really the focus should be to get those highest edges, that extra little color variation to show that there's some variance and some light reflecting off of this. If you really want to, you can also just edge highlight in your own way on all these edges. This is just an easy way to get it done quickly, especially if you're painting a lot of these or you're new to painting. Dry brushing is a foundation technique that you really do need to practice to get it done well. A lot of people tend to over dry brush by putting too much paint on the brush and then continuously trying to change the entire color of a miniature with it, and you end up with a kind of a caked on or chalky texture sometimes, and it really doesn't help your work look as good as it really could. Dry brushing can be very effective and very useful in saving time and looking a good result if it's done gradually, as well as with a few little tweaks as far as techniques are concerned. So as I look over the entire miniature, I'm going to go over and find those high edges, especially the ones that stick out where you know the light would be the most prevalent. And I'm going to go over the entire miniature, and I'm going to come back and try to reestablish some of those higher highlights on those high edges, just to reiterate as well as put a little bit more paint on those, because that paint does have a translucency. Even when you dry brush it on, it'll just make it just a little bit stronger, and then some of those areas will pop just a little bit more. Now, all things being considered, this is a fairly muted dry brush. You could easily go brighter. If you've got a little bit lighter color, that's okay. If you want to add a little bit of a lighter brown or even some white very cautiously to your color to make it even lighter and do a second coat with that, perfectly okay to try that out. You can even use some light colored flesh tones. The trap with red is that if you use anything like straight white or too much white, you can end up with pink because that red is very powerful and it will show through that white. So a flesh tone or a light brown or a reddish brown in this case, or even orange, is much more likely to get a good result and not look pink. So now the red is basically finished. If you wanted to stop here, you could. However, since it's a single color miniature, it's a good idea to add some sort of pop of color, a little bit of contrast, some detail here and there. I've grabbed some black, watered it down a little bit, and I'm just going to quickly go over some areas just to provide some accents. So hands, gun barrels, the little dust covers and joint coverings that may be on the legs or the arms. It adds a nice little contrast to the overall effect of the scheme. You don't have to do this, but it certainly will provide a bit more visual variation for your miniature, especially when viewed at tabletop distance. So I'm just using this thin black to go over things, and then I'm going to use a light gray dry brush once it's completely dry and just touch those particular areas to provide a little bit of highlight. If you're not comfortable with adding details like this right now, the great part is you're finished with the paint scheme. You can put it on a base, get it sealed up, and start using it. And then maybe as your painting skills improve, come back and add these details later on. So you don't have to be finished with a model necessarily and not be able to use it, but also be willing to come back, and as you learn and grow and become more confident in your abilities, you can add details like this and really improve the overall appearance of your miniatures. You can see here I've added some blue and white effects to the PPC barrels, and I've added the gray dry brush over the black contrast areas. I'm still going to go in and add some decals. If you're starting out painting or just learning how, these things are not absolutely necessary for you to do to get a good finished product. If you're exploring and expanding on your abilities, this is a good set of minor and intermediate techniques to change the way your models look overall and really enhance the effect. After adding some flock and some decals to finish up the miniature, I did a matte varnish, and then I added a little bit of gloss to the cockpit glass, and here is the finished product. Post any questions or comments you have below. Follow us on Facebook on Camo Specs Online. Give us a subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Shutdown sequence initiated.